Welcome to the Strategy, Leadership, Culture webinar. This webinar was originally held on November 15th. This is a post-recorded version of that with a new voiceover, as we had some technical difficulties during the actual webinar. During that webinar, we introduced our co-presenters, we defined what the Strategy Culture Nexus is, and more importantly, what are the market drivers and strategic imperatives that we are seeing in the marketplace that had us arrive at this theory or hypothesis. Some specifics of that idea are innovation, so we take some time to define the different types of innovation. We spent some time talking specifically about culture and the role that it plays, leaders and role they play in executing great strategy, why strategy is needed, and at last we presented a case study on how this has actually played out in the real world. And then we had a couple questions presented to us in a Q&A session. We are Ephektiv. We are an organizational effectiveness consulting firm, and we help our customers to better execute on strategy by developing their leaders to cultivate cultures of innovation, accountability, and inclusion. One of our longtime partners in doing this work is Human Synergistics International. Tim Coupler, the Director of Culture and Organizational Development for Human Synergistics, joined us and gave us some insight into their cultural assessment tool, the Organizational Cultural Inventory. Also joining us was Matthew Burks, the Chief Strategy Officer of another industry partner, eSource, a research and innovation firm doing a tremendous amount of work in the electric. So first, we wanted to define what is this nexus that we spoke about when promoting the webinar. Early on, personally in my career, I worked for a large engineering and construction company, building power plants, hydroelectric dams, and desalination plants all over the world. We realized that as we were bringing our solutions to the world, that there was an inextricable link between energy and water. To make energy, you had to have water, and to move water around, you needed energy, and therefore there was a nexus between the two. If you could strategically address both of these in an interdependent way, your solutions were more sustainable and of higher value. What we're seeing today is a new type of nexus that's defining organizational effectiveness and agility. At the head end of this nexus is an organization's strategy, the direction and articulation of where the organization is going. As a key part of that strategy, our leaders are the ones that make the strategy real for the people on the front line and carry it down into the execution of work in each day. This is the who of the strategy, leadership, culture nexus. If we know where we're going and we know who is leading the charge in helping us to get there, there is a how that we can choose in the way that we do our work, and that is our culture. And we're going to speak more about that later in the webinar. Specifically, in the past 5 years of our work, we've really come to believe that all these aspects within our organization need to be addressed collectively to really maximize ongoing performance in a sustained manner. Yes, you can increase performance in fits and starts through the heroic efforts of a few, but to truly remain agile and sustain performance over time, we believe that these need to be inextricably linked. So, to arrive at this, we've seen a number of drivers in the marketplace. We're seeing significant disruption in the different markets in which we work, almost every market that we can think of. Tremendous amounts of volatility within those markets, be they around regulation or compliance, the ability to gain a skilled workforce. And then finally, we're seeing significant drivers around the need for increased inclusion and diversity in the workplace to really take advantage of all the great ideas and talents that are out there in the world. If each one of these unto itself wasn't enough, when you add them together, it truly does result in significant exponential change. And as we all know, when it comes to change, that's something that we're just not good at. As we've worked with senior leaders in multiple industries over the years in addressing things like disruption, some key imperatives that have become part of their organization's mission and strategic objectives. They include the ability to innovate, to find new and exciting, innovative solutions to problems, as well as thinking about what hasn't come yet. There's a significant need to build the capacity for an organization, its leaders, and its people to be agile in the face of change. There's a significant need for leaders to build their skill set at the inclusion of all people within the organization to understand where the organization is going and offer input and ideas and the best ways to get there. And finally, a good discipline around execution of that strategy all the way to the front line is required for sustained performance against key objectives at high levels of quality. So our hypothesis, or we'd like to say theory, as it's actually starting to prove itself out, is the following. The pace and scale of change will continue to accelerate and expand for this foreseeable future. We just don't see it stopping anytime soon. If anything, it's going to become faster and more complex. With that said, for an organization to win within their respective marketplace, that organization will need to continually cultivate its ability to proactively innovate while also at the same time remaining hyper agile to the disruptive forces that it may not see coming. We know that this is a big ask of the organizations that we work with, and we honestly believe that will only be achieved by companies that manage across the strategy, leadership, culture nexus that I just articulated. That nexus can also be defined as a company's capacity, driven by its leaders, to align, engage, and include a diverse workforce in agile, measured, and continually improving strategic direction and execution. I want to spend a little bit of time and talk specifically around one of the primary drivers that we're seeing, which is disruption. This is definitely a hot buzzword. Actually, the idea of disruption is out for a while, made famous by Clayton Christensen's novel, The Innovator's Dilemma. This is actually his definition of what disruption is. A disruptive innovation is one that creates a new market and new value network, disrupting the incumbent, and actually defines a new value network in a way that rapidly displaces established firms, products, and alliances. So it's not just incremental change and incremental improvement by existing competitors. It's when somebody comes in from the outside, oftentimes that isn't on anybody's radar, and is able to put together different aspects of doing that work in a new and different way that completely uproots the way that people had thought about it and can take out incumbents that have been in the industry even for 100 years, seemingly overnight. Examples of that could be Kodak or Blockbuster. For a bit of a deeper definition into disruption, we wanted to use one that's close to our hearts, the electric utility industry. So for a long time, our electric utilities needed only to be very good at burning some very specific things to give us a very base level power to keep the lights on. In actuality, the electric utility industry has actually been around for over 100 years, with the first electric company being founded in the late 1800s in New York. As that model proved itself out, more power companies started to pop up over the United States evolution. And so we incrementally got better at finding new ways to generate energy and subsequently new things to take advantage of that electricity or vice versa, such as TVs and radios. Fairly simple incremental change. But if you fast forward to today, look at the amount of change that's going on. Everything has gone digital, and from a generation standpoint, it's no longer as simple as just burning coal or even burning natural gas. We have tremendous amounts of promise and opportunity in residential and utility scale solar. Wind continues to prove to be a significant source of power with an ever decreasing cost to employ. And we're even looking at innovative things such as garnering and generating power from the tides with underwater windmills, if you will, that as the tide goes in and out, it can generate tremendous amounts of electricity. These are all innovations and improvements on what's called on the generation side of things. But behind the meter in our homes, things have gone just as become just as amazingly complex and continue to do so an accelerating factor. It's no longer just about the TV and the light bulbs in our house. We've got tablets, we've got smartphones, laptops, home entertainment and gaming systems, smart appliances. We can even manage our home from a smart perspective with smart thermostats. And should we choose to, we can even have our vehicles that are in our garages operate completely on electric power. Now, while this is a tremendous amount of change, we would say that at its face value, it's still incremental. It's more complex and it's faster, but this isn't necessarily disruption. So what is disrupting the electric utility industry then? What does disruption really look like? This is what disruption looks like. It can be simple as one person. Elon Musk who started the Tesla company, which recently acquired Solar City, has now defined a new product and new value chain that the incumbents did not see coming. Solar City is a company that you may have encountered in your local Home Depot that can now not only put solar panels on top of your house for you to generate your own electricity, but they've even developed shingles that look like normal shingles or tiles that are actually solar panels. They can install those on your house and you can generate your own electricity so that you can potentially power your own Tesla or other electrical vehicle using a large battery that can be installed in your garage. If I can generate my own electricity, I can store my own electricity, and I can charge my own car and my appliances, what am I as a utility going to do in the future? How am I going to make money? And what's going to happen to us as an industry and as a business? This is what disruption looks like. And if that wasn't enough, you've got other people coming into the fray that normally you wouldn't have seen playing in this space. Amazon is the world's largest online retailer, and it has purchased a significant amount of an organization called Plug Power that develops fuel cells. Amazon is not looking to sell the fuel cells over its online retail network, but all of the massive Amazon warehouses around the world require fuel cells to run their forklifts. So if they can better manage the costs associated with logistics, they can continue to win their space. Google initially wanted to just look at how could it make its own operating facilities more green. So it started looking at how could it power its buildings with renewable green energy. In doing so, they realized that they could potentially leverage their online presence in providing a new marketplace to actually sell electricity to end consumers should they want to choose to make a choice around where they get their electricity from, it being more green in nature rather than from their local utility. And then lastly, here in our backyard in Denver, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory has a prototype of a new air conditioner. Their new air conditioner no longer needs the large, loud, energy-consuming compressor that sits on the outside of your house to allow for air conditioning to take place in the summer. It uses evaporative technologies also, including silicon, to achieve traditional air conditioning quality temperatures with evaporative air conditioning power needs. Imagine if you're Arizona Public Service, the electric utility in Arizona, specifically Phoenix, Arizona, and as your unbelievably warm summer starts to come online and people start to flip on their new NREL air conditioners, your peak load that would happen every day, and quite frankly, your peak revenue stream, is now gone. That is disruptive in its nature, a new product and a new value stream. And so this has utilities very much needing to better execute, be much better and more agile in the face of change, and be more innovative in the way that they do work. It is not specific just to utility. We're seeing the same thing happen in automotive. Of course, we've got the biggies like Ford and Toyota. If we're being disruptive, what is it that we want to do? Well, we want to innovate. And so we wanted to really dissect into what is innovation. So first we wanted to look and see what some people that were much smarter than us were saying about it. Fast Company says that innovation is a process in which value is created to deliver a community of users in the form of a new solution. Some smart people at a really good school in Pennsylvania said it's either using something new or something known, but in a much different way, at a much different time, or a different place. DARPA is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency of the government. They do some significantly innovative things in terms of things like robotics, sensors, as well as the different defense things that they might develop. And they say it's actually that innovation is the aspect of letting the best and the smartest people do what they do best by getting out of their way and providing them with adequate resources. And looking into all of those and looking into the work that we've been able to be successful with our clients, we would say that innovation is diverse thinking. So, can we be innovative? Well, let's look at who is innovative. Who's the best right now? This list probably doesn't surprise anybody. Amazon, Google, Apple, always at the top of the list, but those are new companies. They're not old companies. What about the electrical utilities of the world? What about the healthcare institutions of the world or the universities? Well, Fast Company also identified some organizations that have been around for a long time that are being very innovative. IBM is a great example of this in that they've reinvented themselves a number of times. going from initially just a desktop hardware organization providing typewriters and word processors, moving into the computer space and server space with large-scale computing technologies and hardware. Then from there, they actually moved into the software and consulting space, providing computational platforms as well as consulting to run your business better. And most recently, we've seen them actually leading the charge around artificial intelligence and machine learning. So they continue to reinvent themselves and they continue to innovate. And Marriott, another very mature organization, continually looks to break the mold and redefine something even when it doesn't need to be redefined in terms of driving value that equals loyalty in the people that it serves. And how can it make your lodging experience better, easier, and of more value at every single turn? So we've decided we want to be innovative. How do we actually do that? Well, most organizations start with one-off events. They might have an innovation challenge or an innovation summit or contest. Sometimes these are done once a year. Sometimes they're done more than that. Sometimes they're even done with the public, where they reach out into the public, as they did with the telecom innovation contest, wanting to know what consumers were thinking. But most of the time, these are one-off events, and they may not be very repeatable in terms of their process or the value. So an organization might look to somebody like IDEO or Synectics World for a repeatable process around how to innovate and come up with innovative ideas. We've actually worked with Synectics World in building out a more holistic approach to innovation in one of the clients that we've worked with. And this is very difficult because, again, you're asking people to do things that are different or do things that are new, and that's asking them to change. In this part of the webinar, we had our friend Matt from eSource come in and speak briefly about what they've been seeing from an innovation implementation standpoint. point. They actually have a longer innovation process that helps organizations innovate from end to end so that it can actually be mobilized and monetized at the end of the effort. So in the second cube there, you see design thinking. That right there is the repeatable innovation process. But they've gone as far as to look at. So for innovation, we would say that it needs to be a norm. It can be functional in nature and be achieved more quickly, but not that's going to keep you in a competitive nature. We actually spent some time on the webinar breaking down. At the most basic level, innovation can be enhancing continuous improvement. So that's really just updating a policy, maybe coming up with a new process or tweaking an existing process, making a minor adjustment in your approach to something, improving what exists today. The next level of innovation is achieving a step change in process, products, and services. So just a process update or a policy change won't do it. We need to implement new software. We need to redesign a process. Maybe we need to reorg the company or the line of business to be more effective. Maybe we need to extend our product line to take advantage of more revenue streams. Those are bigger changes. So those require a different level of innovation that oftentimes becomes longer in duration. And then we also can go beyond just a step change in process and realize that we might need to innovate just to survive the marketplace disruption that I've already articulated. We might need to rapidly come up with new products. We might need to come up with new organizational competencies that we haven't had before. We might need to make is that they are reactive in nature. We believe if that an organization truly wants to get out in front and lead the competitive battle in their industry, that their innovation needs to be proactive. This is the type of innovation that creates a strategic advantage in the marketplace. It proactively identifies and exploits new opportunities. It's going to help your organization improve. What we need to be aware of is that with each level of innovation that we encounter, you're going to run into more culture, as it will be critical to the success of that level of innovation sustaining itself over time. So let's get back to the Nexus. Let's start with culture. This is where we had Tim Coupler from Human Synergistics join us. Human Synergistics is a cultural analytics and assessment organization that has designed the most accurate, widely used cultural assessment tool in the world. And Ephektiv has been a power user of all of the Human Synergistics tools for nearly 2 decades now, and helping us to help our clients make culture tangible and more manageable. Tim set the context by helping us understand that culture is just the way that we do things around here. Now, that is very ambiguous, and so it's been our job using tools like with Human Synergistics to deconstruct culture and make it more tangible and manageable along its different parts. Culture has different levels of depth to it. The parts of culture that are visible and more easier to change are things like artifacts and climate. Artifacts are things that are in an organization that even if the people weren't there would tell you what that organization did and what it values. So when you go into a building and you see different signs promoting safety or promoting the values of the organization or promoting the regions that they're in, you can start to discern what that company does and what it values based on its artifacts. The climate of an organization is what it feels like to be within that organization, either as a visitor or as an employee. What does it feel like to be part of that? The example that we oftentimes use is what does it feel like when you go to the opening day of a sporting event, like the opening day of baseball season here in the States? Usually it's full of energy, it's very positive, everybody's excited, hoping for the best. And then we contrast. Tim spent a little bit more time on. Tim then took us into quickly how Human synergistics specifically measures culture. Human synergistics looks at culture as being defined in really three key areas that have different levels of expected behaviors in an organization. Constructive styles that we see here at the top in the blue are ones that we know from a data standpoint lead to effectiveness and sustainability of performance over time. To us, we've been able to see that organizations that are highly adaptive, high performing over a long period of time tend to have what we call more of a constructive circumplex, which is the one illustrated here on the left. And those organizations that are slow to change are unable to meet their key performance indicators on an ongoing basis, oftentimes have cultures that look like the one on the right, where there's much more of the aggressive defensive and passive defensive styles. So in a nutshell, the constructive cultures that we see as really helping organizations to execute on their strategies and overcome disruption tend to be proactive, foster innovation, reinforce personal responsibility about the leaders. What we're seeing here is that leaders are the ones leading the charge in helping the organization do its work every day. But our management methodology or approach to management is still one that's left over from the industrial age. And so we're looking to help managers manage in a new way, something that a number of people have referred to as Management 2.0. In any organization, you still have a strategy that needs to be brought by leadership to the front line for execution. Traditionally in the past, though, Strategic planning was often long-term only, and it was very concrete and set in stone with not much thought given to what ifs and things that could change. It was brought to the front line. Those strategies were brought to the front line from the top down by leaders in more of a one-way delivery system with not a lot of room for question or discussion, and the front line was expected to just comply and get their work done. And what we're seeing today is that managers have to play a different role. Strategies today, in addition to being long-term, are also short-term. Google actually has strategic planning windows as small as 90 days because sometimes they just don't know what's going to happen a year out. They have to be much more agile and open to change, and they are becoming very, very reliant on the use of data. This is oftentimes very different for organizations that in the past either just went off of gut feel or just a few data points, and what worked last year we'll do again this year. That's very, very much changing. Also, just as much as the strategies are changing, our workforce is changing now. And so leaders can no longer just push things down to the front line. They're in charge of actually cultivating an environment that includes people, provides them with a clear direction around what they need to do, but asks for their ideas and ways to improve it, and then lets them go do the work in an autonomous way. We know in our research across the generations that, especially as we get into the millennial generation, there is a significant need for them to have direct impact on the work that they do and see the benefit from it in terms of who it's impacting and how it's having value to the society and the users of those products and services. And so we help organizations to really get better with their leaders cultivating those environments of inclusive and autonomous work, and also helping those organizations understand that the front line is going to have some of the best insights and ideas that would affect strategy over the long term. And so don't forget to ask those people, because oftentimes they know how to solve the problem better than those at the top. So the last part in our Nexus is strategy. So we've talked about the leaders and we've talked about culture. Strategy is really at the forefront of all this, and it's setting the tone. It's the direction in which we want to go. It's the decisions that we've made in terms of what we think we need to do to be able to win our market. Once we've got a good, clear direction around where we're going, we want our leaders to be very adept at taking those high-level ideas and working and collaborating with their people to really understand, internalize, and own those objectives and bring their own value to it, their own ideas and their own innovation to it. If they're doing that, from that you get a great culture of sustained performance on an ongoing basis. And again, using our human synergistics tools, we can actually measure this. In an organization where an employee is given very clear direction and they understand what's expected of them and they don't get mixed messages, this is what their circumplex looks like. Very, very constructive with lots of value around achievement, humanistic behavior towards others, learning, and collaboration. However, in an organization where strategy is not clear, someone doesn't know what their role is, and who receives mixed messages from management on an ongoing basis, those employees are oftentimes left to either fight for what they need to get done using things like power and perfectionism, or they hide because it's not a safe place to be. So lots of avoidance and lots of sticking to the rules. This requires the translation of high-level strategic ideas down to the front line. An example we covered in the webinar was one using DART rate, which is a safety metric used in the electric utility. It is a number that is based on trends over 200,000 man-hours worked, and DART stands for Days Away Restricted Time. So this looks at how much time do people have to take off of work because of an injury that they had, over 200,000 hours worked. The problem is, it would take me as an individual 100 years to work 200,000 hours. So it's very difficult for me as a manager to have a discussion around how my line crew that's working out in the bucket trucks can directly affect DART rate. So what we do is we work with leaders to increase their capacity to translate strategies to the front line. So in this case, the organization became much better around driving the ideas and actually measuring the adoption of things like self-check and peer check, the 6 stages of actual switching, identifying critical steps in the use of personal protective equipment. All things that can be done to affect safety, but done so in a way where the people at the front line see how they can make a difference each day. Organizations that are doing a great job of strategy engagement are translating goals. They do a tremendous amount of planning, letting even supervisors and middle managers, um, allowing them the time to think about what's my mission, what are the critical objectives that I have to get right in my part of the organization to really affect our goals. So letting managers be strategic and not just put out the fires that are in their inbox each day. Um, the team and the department has a very clearly defined mission and vision. They collect data and they make informed decisions around how well they're doing, and when they're not doing how they need to, they figure out how to close the gap. And oftentimes they do that by increased inclusion from the team and those people on the front line coming up with the solutions. Again, Management 2.0. Organizations that aren't doing a good job of this oftentimes just pass through the goals. We've actually seen frontline employees that have their own goals as copy and pasted from the company goals. And that's just very, very hard to move the needle on that. We see organizations and managers getting tactics focused. They get caught up in their inbox, only putting out the problem of the day. We oftentimes see problems when the leader is defining how the work goes as opposed to the employees defining how they can do the work best, which is in essence micromanagement. And you can't manage what you don't measure, and so lack of measurement and data is a big culprit to low performance. One-way delegation does not engage the intrinsic motivators in the front line that we would like to have and that actually sustain performance and decrease attrition over time. And depending on what worked in the past to get you where you're going to go tomorrow is oftentimes a mistake that we see. Again, things that I'm sure aren't big surprises for anybody. That was the theory piece of our Nexus in terms of the strategy, leadership, culture theory or idea. And so we presented a very brief case study in the real world. It was concerning one of the utilities that we worked with, the large Northeastern utility, 2,300 employees, 48,000 miles of power lines. And about 6 years ago, the president of that company came to us with this problem. He needed to increase his capital spend, the money they spend every year on building out the grid, from 250 million to 1 billion a year, and they were going to do that for 5 years running. Not to mention, they were at the beginning of the natural gas, renewables, and electrical vehicle era. So disruption was just starting to come online, and they needed to get very, very competent at spending 4 times the money that they spent every year for 5 years running. And basically, he knew that his current organizational culture and behaviors would not get him where he needed to be. It wasn't going to be fast enough. So we engaged them with assessing their strategy and their culture. This is what their culture looked like. This is very typical of the utilities. They had low expectations for knowing the business, low expectations for sharing ideas, a lot of just say no instead of saying yes, but, or yes, and, short-term focused, stick to the rules, very little accountability, very much reactive, wait to see what external forces make them change rather than seeing what can they change proactively. Do what you're told, and lots of internal competition, what we see oftentimes where silos don't work together. So first we started with strategy. And organization, and we said, how good is your strategy? It was not very good and it was not very clear. And so we helped them get more clear about their strategy and get better at cascading it from the executive leadership team down to the front line, so the translation that I spoke about earlier. We then did a significant amount of development of their leaders beyond just the cascading of strategy, but also in doing work differently. So increasing accountability, coaching for performance, being strategic in a middle management role. What's my vision and what's my mission for my part of the company? And how do we solve problems at the front line by asking people what they think? That was the leadership piece. And then finally, we started looking at how can we embed innovation on an ongoing process. This is not easy. This requires massive amounts of sponsorship at the highest levels of the organization, and it takes time. It's actually been over 5 years now that we've been engaged with them in really looking at their strategy, developing their leaders to have a great sustaining culture of performance. But it has paid off. Culturally, the organization looked like, culturally, the organization looked like this when we came into it. And as of 2015, management has shifted to being considerably constructive, as well as the individual contributors also being constructive as well. So we have successfully shifted the cultural behaviors there as well. Now, that's just the culture. Like we said, it's always needs to be tied to strategy and the bottom line. And so we did some work with the organization on their industry KPIs. In just 1 year, the distribution group has attributed over $6.5 million of savings due to the cultural initiatives that were set in line to allow them to do different types of process improvements like unit costing, contractor reduction, and joint temporary work assignments. They could have done these anyway, but they were done more quickly and they were adopted in a way that became the new norm much more readily than they had in the past because we addressed the. Another things that utilities look at is reliability. Basically, the net of this is that the organization over the course of this time, again, because of the cultural initiatives that we help them with in accelerating and facilitating the program initiatives that they had and the improvements, have taken them from a third quartile reliability to top decile in their performance, to the point where they're even getting benchmarked now by other organizations. We ended the webinar, which is a few quick case studies again around innovation. We had a foreman that, because of the training that he was given around fostering accountability and asking ideas around how to do things differently, gave the work assignments and the engineering to his teams to construct the work for the week rather than him doing it the way he had been doing it for years. He would spend his weekends putting together the work packages for his teams and then hand them out on Monday. He actually started asking his teams, how do they all want to approach the work? How do they want to split it up? What's best? What resources are best used where and how? And he actually ended up getting his weekends back because he didn't have to prepare as much. Not to mention the men were more engaged. They're proud of the work that they were doing. And again, all this is done still to regulatory compliance levels. It was all done to safety requirements, and oftentimes was done quicker and cheaper than it initially had been designed to do. An example of this, and reaching out to the front line, where a team figured out how that they could build some things called capacitor banks on the ground rather than on the poles. So unbelievably more safe in the approach. They could actually assembly line construct the capacitor banks in the service centers, so they had a bunch of them that they could work with at once, so it increased the duration of the job, saved a lot of money, and again was looked at as one of the new ways of doing work in the industry. And then a very large-scale innovation that took place was that the organization, utilities are oftentimes broken up by region, and when they reached out to the guys that were doing the work every day out in the trucks and out in the field, they shared that they were tired of being right next to a job they knew they could help on and not being able to go work on it, or not being able to trade out resources with the other regions based on what kind of workload they had or what kind of weather they had. And so they redesigned the work management processes to allow them to reach across borders, to trade work, to trade teams, to light up specialty teams on short notice when they needed them, and have absolutely been critical in taking work back from contractors and decreasing the cost of the operations in the organization. So that was really it. We got into just the last couple of minutes because we went long of Q&A. The best and big takeaway Q&A standpoint question that was offered was, what about diversity and inclusion? And honestly, we've found, again, in the recent past 5 years, that the inclusion of diverse ideas is the most critical thing in performance improvement. And so managers and leaders that have a very clear understanding of their strategy need to develop their skills and their capacity to not only bring diverse sets of people together to solve problems and to innovate new ideas, but they need to do it in a way, they need to bring those people and include them and actually facilitate the generation of those ideas. And so sometimes it's not enough just to bring people together. You've got to bring them together and cultivate a culture that is safe for them to ask what if, that allows them to try things and maybe fail, but learn along the way and develop themselves, because we know over the course of time that drives engagement through intrinsic motivation, and that leads to sustained performance. It leads to people staying with the company longer, sharing knowledge. Nothing but good benefit falls out from that. So that was the show, or the webinar, if you will. It was definitely a show for sure. We've loved doing this work. It's been an honor for us to be able to do this with such committed leaders. We are happy to present this case study to you and your internal team and leadership, should it help you in the conversations that you're trying to have with culture change, supporting strategy, and the need and the role for leaders as being critical to that. And if you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out to us directly. Thank you, and we hope you found this valuable, and we hope to hear from you and work with you in the future.